Um, Hello, everyone. I'm Nola. I'm based at Tufts University, and I work on the ANH Academy Research Communities Initiative. I'm so glad to have everyone joining us here today. This is a pretty special research community meeting since we have one of our ANH grants presenting today. Um, I'll give a brief introduction, and then I will pass it over to Greg and Ankita, who will present their research and their grant. In the meantime, I invite everyone to turn on their cameras if your internet connection allows and say hello in the chat. And for anyone who's new to research communities, I'll share a teeny bit of background. We've designed these so that people can share successes, failures, learnings, goals, anything about their research at any stage of the research process. There are very few requirements to present. We just ask that you have a clear goal and offer a short description of your topic, and then save half of the presentation time for a discussion with the participants. Um, our presenters have shared experiences in many countries, um, and on many different topics. And we have the two communities, this one on food supply loss and waste, and the other one on food access and demand for healthy diets. So between the two of them, we hope to cover the entire range of food system um, components. So today's session will be a presentation on solar powered interventions for resilient and equitable food systems. And then we'll have a group discussion where you can ask questions, give your feedback, or draw parallels. And I'm hoping to see what kind of conversation this fosters. Now I will pass it over to Greg and Ankita, and they will introduce themselves and get started with their presentation.
Oh, thank you very much, Nola. And yeah, actually, we have some questions for you at the end, so maybe we can flip the tables as well in the discussion time. But thank you so much for the opportunity to present today and for giving up your time to be here. My name is Greg Cooper, and I'm a research fellow at the University of Sheffield. And I also have my excellent colleague with me today, Dr. Ankita Mondal from St. John's Research Institute in Bangalore. And today we would just like to basically give an overview and put on the map our ANH-funded project. So SPIRE-FS, Solar Powered Interventions for Resilient and Equitable Food Systems. And this project was funded under the first round of the competitive research grants, as Nola mentioned. And so we're about 2 months in currently. I think we've just finished our second month. So we're in the midst of tool development and ethics submissions and the like. But just to really give kind of a broad overarching view of the project, speak about some of the key contours, geography, study aims, settings, our kind of 3-stage methodology, which we'll get into towards the end. And then just some kind of discussion points towards the end, some potential challenges that we see on the horizon and would be interesting in the group's kind of feedback. So before I bring in Ankita, just a quick kind of too long didn't read 1-slide summary of our project. So the vast majority of research into solar powered post-harvest loss interventions, we're talking solar powered cold storage, solar drying, even kind of small autonomous vehicles, solar powered or battery powered vehicles that might take fresh fruits and vegetables to markets. The vast majority of research has been focused on the kind of technological aspects of, of the air conditioning units or the batteries or the solar panels. And even where these have been developed in field settings, in the real world, they've often been kind of imposed on local communities, or perhaps they've underutilized kind of working with local communities to co-develop, co-design these kind of infrastructures. And as a consequence, sometimes these interventions end up with a socio-technological mismatch between the kind of wants and desires and local capacities of local communities, of end users, and the actual technology itself. So our project is all about trying to understand how to co-design and co-evaluate these interventions with real end users in the field, in local markets, in rural India and supply chains, conducting a mixed methods process evaluation to push the study of these interventions beyond just the technology itself, but think about what are the implications for food loss and waste, for potentially the availability and prices of these foods in local markets, kind of go beyond purely just the technology itself. And also then, trying to think about what do the government need? As Ankita will talk about shortly, there is a lot of policy momentum in India currently, particularly in the state of Odisha, where we're working, to fund solar powered cold storage, drying mechanisms. So how can we start to integrate some of these participatory co-design kind of principles into policy making? So that's our kind of one slide snapshot, and we'll unpack these throughout the next half an hour. Just quickly to introduce the team. The project is co-led by Professor Tinku Thomas, who is a biostatistician and a nutritionist at St. John's Medical College in Bangalore. And currently there's also Rajashekar Reddy and Ankita Mondal, who of course is on the call today. There is then myself and Martin Watts, Dr. Martin Watts. We're both geographers from the University of Sheffield. And as you all will know, Bhavani Shankar, Professor Bhavani Shankar, we have worked with Bhavani for I've worked with him now for nearly 8 years. Then there are colleagues from the rural livelihood NGO, Pradhan. And currently there are 4 colleagues. We're currently recruiting 2 more. They are the everyday linkage between the research team and the field sites, the local communities where we'll be developing these interventions. And then we have colleagues from the Selco Foundation, which is a not-for-profit solar technology. They are the experts in the solar technology, in procurement, in innovations, particularly in agri-food systems. So they've been working across India for the last 20 or so years in the solar space. And I should just say that we intentionally kind of designed the institutions here to try and cover as many bases as possible within the grant scope. So, the nutritionists and the Indian food systems, the livelihoods specialists in Pradhan, particularly climate sensitive, gender sensitive kind of agri-food systems, livelihoods. They're the real experts there. And then, of course, the solar folk at Selco. And just to say also, we're also recruiting at least 2 other researchers at St. John's, an economist or an agribusiness expert, and also an additional qualitative researcher. Just to quickly plug our little project website, which I think went live yesterday. And just to say on this, we have a little bibliography of some of the kind of key literature reviews and empirical studies which help to inform our proposal and our research plans. So if you're interested in this space and we're interested more in how we came up with some of our ideas and our plans, then it's under the About page on our website. So Ankita ji, I think I will hand over to you to take us through the study rationale for the next 10 or so minutes. And yeah, I'll then come back in terms of the methods and so on. So Ankita, jab aap taiyar hai, you can start and I will click the slides.
All right. Thank you so much, Gregory. I'll take us through the rationale. Am I audible?
You are, Ankita. Yeah.
Okay. I'll take us through the rationale behind the project. So why this problem matters to us and what the existing research tells us, why in India and why specifically Odisha. Next slide, please. Yeah. To get the global picture, what we are aware of now is around 750 million people experience hunger globally, and at the same time over 1 billion tons of food is lost or wasted every single year. And to put this into perspective, there's enough food to feed 950 million people annually. And with that contrast, nearly a billion people going hungry while so much food is lost or wasted is really what drew us all into this work. And food loss and waste is not just a food security concern. It contributes to around 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Also, perhaps less well known is that around 60% of micronutrient availability, particularly calcium, iron, zinc, is also lost through the supply chain. And no, we cannot grow more food to compensate the loss. Multiple planetary boundaries have already been exceeded. So one pathway to reduce food loss from what we already is from what we already grow. And in the low and middle income countries, 90% of these losses occur not at the farm, but between the farm gate and the retail. Next slide, please. So why India and why in Odisha? There's three stories around it. So first being the nutrition gap. India produces enough fruits and vegetables. The net availability is 520 grams per person per day, but the actual consumption is very low, less than half of WHO recommendation. And part of this gap is explained directly by the post-harvest losses. And a significant portion of that nutrition is being lost before it even reaches the household. The next, yeah. The gap is also not evenly distributed. The consumption of the nutrient dense foods is strongly tied with wealthier households, or the caste or the gender gaps in the households. There is also the infrastructure gap. Only 4% of India's fresh produce moves through the cold chain. There's an estimated 13 million ton shortfall in cold storage capacity for perishable foods. The next point. The third story is the policy window, and this is what makes this time the right moment for us. So the 2025 union budget set aside 89 million pounds for the horticulture program, with solar cooling as a central objective. So therefore, solar cold storage is expanding, and the policy signals are clear on that. What feels less certain to us is whether this expansion will happen in ways that genuinely reach rural communities, women, and people who are already marginalized. And that is where the project is trying to contribute to. So there has been a decades of research already done, over 40 years of work, and however, the SDG target 12.3, which is halving the food loss and waste by 2030, is expected to be missed. Looking across the reviews, the first is the focus on the production. There has been a number of recurring gaps and patterns that stands out. First being the focus is generally on production rather than markets. Around 93% of the post-harvest losses interventions have targeted the producers, while in the lower middle income countries, most of the losses happen downstream in transport, storage, and markets. Secondly, most studies focus on a single commodity, usually a staple crop. Only about a third focus on fruits and vegetables and animal source foods like eggs, fish, and dairy, which barely is featured in the problem. Third, the participatory approaches are largely absent. Only about 21% of interventions for the NDF foods involved community members in any meaningful way, and only 0.5% including a training component. The next point. And fourth, the outcomes beyond food loss rates are rarely measured. Only about 12% of studies looked at economic outcomes, and only 3% examined the social outcomes. So our project is designed to try and address all four of these gaps within a single study, working in the markets, focusing on nutrient-dense foods, using community co-design, and trying to measure a broader range of outcomes. Next slide, please. Yeah. As a part of our proposal, we conducted a scoping review led by Dr. Martin, and here we wanted to specifically see to what extent participatory design processes have been used, and what kinds of outcomes have been explored in terms of solar powered post harvest interventions. We started with 7,001 papers using these string combinations, and after removing the lab based studies, the solar intervention before farm gate, non-LMC context, we arrived at 15 studies. Next slide, please. So of the 15 studies, 10 were studies of solar dryers and 5 were of solar powered cold stores. 5 were based in India and they tended to focus on single commodity items, especially green leafy vegetables, milk, and fishes were particularly common. 11 of the 15 assessed intervention outcomes. The technologies generally did appear to help reduce food loss rates, although only 6 of these 11 explored implications of food loss and waste in detailed way. 7 studies identified significant barriers to adoption, high investment cost, maintenance expenses that exceeded local capabilities. And what stood out was only one study in 2018. They developed solar drying with citrus fruit farmers in Mozambique using participatory approaches similar to co-designing and evaluated the intervention. Only about 2 studies considered any equity angles or trade-offs at all. So the picture that emerges is of a technology that shows real promise, but where our collective understanding of how to make it work equitably, sustainably, and with communities is still quite limited. That's the space we are hoping to contribute to. Moving to our aims and the study aims and settings. Our overall aim is to assess the feasibility of co-designing solar powered interventions for post-harvest loss reduction in rural Odisha in India. And we are not primarily testing whether solar cold storage can reduce food loss in technical terms. That part is fairly well established. What we are genuinely trying to understand is what it takes to make these interventions work in a real world community context, what communities want, how facilities should be governed, who benefits, who under what conditions, and what the real cost and trade-offs look like. So our 4 objectives flow from this. Our first objective is the co-design itself. Working with self-help group women and other local actors, we want to co-design 3 to 5 solar-powered post-harvest post-harvest and loss, post-harvest loss interventions in rural food markets, trying to understand not just what kind of facility communities want, but where it should sit, how it should operate, and who should govern it, what produce it makes. Yeah. The second objective is a mixed methods process evaluation. Once interventions are running, we want to understand what actually happens: food loss rates, the NDF availability and prices, user incomes, cost, greenhouse gas emissions, the equity outcomes. The objective 3 is a demand creation model for the stored and dried foods. Even if we reduce food losses and extend shelf lives, whether people would actually want to buy stored food or dried food. And
You okay,
and
Ankita?
yeah,
Okay.
yes. And the fourth objective is basically to develop an expert reference group, the standing group of policymakers, the state officials, industry experts, and we are planning to engage them throughout the study to think about what pathways to equitable scale up might look like. And I think next slide. So we are working in 2 districts in Orissa, Eastern India, Keonjhar and Mayurganj. These want, yeah, and yeah, both of these are tribal majority districts. However, we are not including scheduled tribes as such, but then this area has known malnutrition and less access to NDFs. and less diverse diets per se, particularly among children. And I think now I'll hand it over to Gregory.
Sure. No, thank you, Ankita. That was fantastic. Just to say also, I mean, the solar element is potentially important in these districts because of the lack of reliable electricity connection, particularly when you begin to start to go towards the boundaries of the forests that are in Mayaband and Kionja. So solar provides an alternative form of electricity within these contexts. And finally, also, I think Ankita may have mentioned, but the live policy window. We were lucky actually to meet the director of horticulture and the director of agriculture as well, Ankita, in Bhubaneswar when we had our project kickoff. And essentially, the Odisha government is putting a lot of money into the development of solar post-harvest loss interventions, cold storage in particular. And they were, to begin with, they asked us, Carl, we've done lots of research on, the workings of solar-powered cold storage. Why are you doing this? We said, actually, we're more about the processes, about how local people can actually contribute to their design, governance, operation, what do they need, and so on. So we were very pleasantly surprised that they got on board, and I think they were asking for our results within the next 12 months, which we had to tell them wouldn't really be possible, but we're going to be keeping them involved over the next few months as the project continues. So moving on, okay. Just the last little slide here, and just to give some kind of photos and context really of the markets and the supply chains we're talking about. Actually, this project is happening at the same time as another project called Infusion, which is led by Professor Sunita Kadiala and also Professor Bhavani Shankar, the Indian Food Systems for Improved Nutrition project. And actually, in that project, working in the same district, so Kianja district. And recently, we had completed a market survey of 135 rural markets in the district and tried to understand the types of infrastructures, types of storage that are available in these markets. And of the 135 markets, around about 40% had any form of overhead shading, as we can see here, although these are temporary. And about 60% of markets had any form of raised platform to help keep the produce, above the ground. To reduce exposure to dust and dirt and also rainwater as well, particularly during the monsoon. We did a more detailed survey of 40 markets within the region, and 2 of the markets out of 40, and I appreciate it's only 40, but 2 of the markets had any form of storage, and none of the markets had any form of cold storage. So just to say, really, these markets face key vulnerabilities to various causes of food loss and waste in the markets. So, a lack of somewhere to safely handle and store food during transportation and unloading, exposure of food to kind of mud and dirt and insects and so on, elements that can reduce the quality of fresh fruits and vegetables and animal source foods. A lack of somewhere to safely store and securely store food overnight or for longer periods means eventually that vendors in these markets must either sell their produce for a lower price, must simply dispose of their produce at the roadside or feed to cattle, for example, or try and find somewhere else to sell the produce. And that often comes with a time or an opportunity or a financial cost as well. And critically, Odisha is one of the more climate vulnerable states of India, located on the Bay of Bengal, perennially vulnerable to cyclones, to extreme weather, plus 40 degrees, high humidity. So, part of the reason here is around the creation of these storage or drying facilities that can help, improve quality, acceptability of these foods. So to get into the study methods, how are we doing for time? It's 28 minutes past my time. If it's okay, another 5 to 10 minutes, and we can always come back during the discussion session. So I think I've covered most of these, but kind of the foundational pillars upon which the study is based. So solar, so we're not looking at diesel generated cold storage, for example. Nutrient dense foods, here we're talking about fruits, vegetables, and where possible animal source foods in terms of dairy, eggs, fish, etc. Again, this will be part of the co-design process. Looking at supply chains and markets. So we're not focused on the production side in terms of the actual interventions. Co-design is key, you know, building on a number of the activities we've done in Fusion, but multiple data collections to try and understand what is the context, what do the locals need, and kind of co-design the standard operating procedures, the terms of references of using these interventions with the end users. And also then policy engagement. Too often we just do our research and kind of forget about the policymakers and yeah, need to bring them along. So the portfolio of our solar infrastructures that Selco Foundation have worked with and they have experience with across this part of India, small scale solar cold storage facilities, often between 5 and 10 tons, can store food, you know, for a number of days and beyond, depending upon the food item. Then there is a relatively small scale, relatively affordable form is evaporative cooling. These are this one here actually in the middle is from Bagamunda market in Odisha. Actually visiting this market, which also has to the right hand side, I don't know if you can see, that's also a solar powered cold storage unit as well. So actually this market was kind of the inspiration for this proposal and this project. So solar cold storage, evaporative cooling, and then solar drying as well, which is obviously a different function, a different process, but is often used particularly amongst these local communities to extend the shelf life of food, but often also going into different supply chains downstream. Just quickly on to why co-design. I mean, I guess I'm preaching to the choir here, but kind of 4 key pathways, bringing end users along from the very start to try and reduce the kind of the socio-technological mismatch between the end users and the technology, to provide an intervention that they understand how to use and tell us how they best want to use it and utilize the technology. Then kind of the growing awareness of the costs and the potential benefits of these technologies, the community-led design and development of these interventions hopefully help promote kind of the active involvement of women and marginalized groups in these activities. And also then the kind of the top-down element as well, that including the decision makers, constantly updating them about our activities, getting their feedback, and kind of trying to bring the top down and the bottom up together in the middle. Longer term, sorry, this is in a very abbreviated theory of change kind of diagram, but longer term, the kind of more equitable design use and understanding how we can integrate the needs of local communities in this way into a broader kind of movement towards developing these sorts of interventions. We hope as well to be creating the conditions to reduce food loss and waste, to enhance the availability of perishable foods, the quality of these foods as well. But there are some challenges of doing this within the scope of our study, and we'll talk about that shortly. And I've spoken about the fit as well. I'll keep moving just for time, and please we can come back to this as and when in the discussion section. So there are 3 key stages of our study basically. Currently we're in the formative stage, as we called it, so the first 6 months of the project, although of course the boundaries kind of blur. So recently we've just submitted our ethics submission to St. John's Research Institute, St. John's Medical College, for the first 15 months or so of our project. So at the same time, we're doing various kind of secondary studies around suitability of different villages and markets for the development, as informed by different Government of India secondary data sets. For example, the Mission Antigodya data set, which is a nationwide village level infrastructure survey, which is absolutely stunning in its scale, and there's been 3 rounds now, so it's a really fantastic resource. Once we have received our ethics approval, and we're also going to submit for the Home Ministry Screening Committee clearance, so HMSC, with St. John's being a medical college, so we have to go through HMSC as well. So once this is out the way, hopefully in the first 3 to 4 months, or 4 to 5 months of the project, we'll then be getting into the field and doing our initial FGDs to kind of set the stage. And then we move into our co-design stage, really, which is the next 9 months of the project. So this is then the active data collection around co-designing. Actually, I have a slide on this in a minute, but the ergonomics of the technology, the terms of reference and SOPs with end user kind of communities. And then our process evaluation. And I'll come to that shortly, but we hope at least 9 months for each intervention, various streams of qualitative and quantitative data collection to understand, what's happening, who is it working for, what are the types of conditions that these interventions are creating. So a process evaluation of both the co-design process, but also then the actual intervention itself. And of course, we've been speaking about the engagement with the policymakers as well throughout this. So let's get into the co-design phase. I'm just conscious of time, so I will just click through and tell you about this. So actually, the reviewers during the proposal came back to us and said, there must be some red lines, of the co-design. It can't be a blank slate. You're not going to be, I presume you're not going to be storing fizzy pop, for example. Okay, yes, that's a good point. So we came up with some non-negotiables essentially, and that's around the collective ownership. We don't want to establish a cold storage on a large farmer's land that only he has access to. So around collective ownership, whether that's through the self-help groups or the agricultural production clusters that we may be working with. There must be solar powered. There must be a solar element to these interventions. That's absolutely critical. It's the scope of our research. Co-design activities, it can't be purely with the block office or the block agricultural development office. It will be with the women-led self-help groups who produce and market their foods in the local markets of Kionja and Mayaband. And it's through our connection with Pradhan that we work with these groups. And then again, as I said about the pillars, nutrient-dense foods, and really trying to keep these foods in fresh supply chains, local markets and supply chains. And there will be some challenges around that, and we can chat about it shortly. Then some of the key components of the co-design. So this is what we're envisaging currently, around the intervention type, around where the intervention should be located. There are key strategic decisions. An intervention can be located 1 kilometer in the wrong direction, and it no longer becomes economically feasible for the users to use it. They have to take a detour and the time and the cost and so on. The types of food items that the groups want to store, and thinking about how we can best match up with local demand, what is being consumed, and crop calendar type work. Then the design of the space, to the extent to which these technologies can be modified. It could be shelf height, it could be the types of different plastic crates and so on that they need. Just within the bounds of what's possible, actually working with the actual technology providers and the local communities to try and think about what is needed, kind of in terms of ergonomics. In terms of what is needed in terms of training materials, we often think we know what end users need, but they are also sometimes the best judges of that. So co-developing training materials and having their inputs there. Key kind of guidelines and operations, key guidelines and procedures around operations of the technologies, and ultimately also thinking with the groups around embedding safeguards, actually in order to create an intervention that is efficacious and has an element of fidelity, works as designed. Often what happens in India is technology might be captured by men, for example. So how can we work with the groups to potentially guard against this? Just quickly go over this various data collections during our co-design phase, primarily qualitative. We'll also be bringing on an economist, I keep saying an economist, but somebody with much better understanding of economics and finances and agribusiness type knowledge than what already exists in the team. The key co-design element, though, will be around the group model building, and it's as well as the day-to-day activities Pradhan. They are embedded in the field and are there with the local communities. But group model building, as you may be aware, it is an approach based around systems thinking, systems terminology, ideas of stocks, flows, and feedback loops as well, to bring diverse sets of stakeholders together to work through a problem or to potentially develop a solution to a problem. So it's something we've been doing in the Infusion project in Odisha to think about enhancing what can be done to enhance the climate resilience of these local markets. So it's something we've been using. It's a way to basically 4 to 5 iterative sessions per study site we'll be doing, and ultimately aiming to co-design the terms of reference and the standard operating procedures of these interventions that will then actually be developed. We'll be co-funding them as part of the project. We're lucky to have a tranche of funding for intervention development. And yeah, so happy to talk more about this. So we'll then be setting up the interventions in between 3 to 5 study sites. And again, just to emphasize, this is a feasibility study. And we have to hold our hands up and say this is not a traditional impact assessment. We don't have the sample size, or we never set out to say that DDS, dietary diversity, will change by 1.1 points at p is 0.05. It was never the aims of this project, primarily because 2 reasons. One, we don't think we understand how best to go about designing these interventions in a equitable, sustainable way and effective way as well, to actually be able to then jump in the deep end at this stage. So we felt like we'd be setting ourselves up for failure. And the second is we appreciate there are a number of steps between the cold storage into the food environment, into people's personal and household food choices and decisions. So essentially, this is trying to lay the groundwork for a larger study in future, really trying to establish feasibility and potential. Happy to answer more questions about this. So we are in the space of process evaluation. So collecting qualitative and quantitative data is something we've been doing in the Infusion project with the Didi Hut intervention, collecting a stream of qualitative and quantitative data, understanding who is using the intervention, why they are, who is not and why not, what are the barriers, perceptions of accessibility and acceptability of the intervention through various qualitative approaches. Then the more traditional kind of monitoring and evaluation type data collection. Does it work? How well are our SOPs and TORs that are being co-designed with the local community? How well are they working? And then elements such as uptake intensity, uptake extent, who is using, what is being stored, how long for, how frequently, and so on and so on. So kind of high frequency, I think we said twice weekly data on intervention use. And then the part where we try to push the boundaries a little bit more, and it's something I think we'll have a chat for it. Well, we can chat here as well. It would be great to speak about this. Is go beyond technology use, go beyond is it working, who is it working for, and why, to looking at other dimensions. So, if you read any literature, will say cold storage is, it's almost framed as a panacea, to reducing food loss and waste in markets, to stabilizing prices and so on. But to what extent may this be true within our feasibility study? Can we collect some quantitative data, or we are going to be collecting some quantitative data around costs, around availabilities of the nutrient-dense foods in our study sites and markets, around what is being stored, around what is being consumed, and where from as well? Are these pathways matching, or are we storing completely the wrong things? So I kind of hesitate slightly because I'm conscious we're not trying to prove quantitative changes in dietary outcomes. That's beyond the scope of the project, but trying to understand, the potential for these interventions if scaled up to inform and influence. And just to say finally, just our process evaluation will comprise of multiple qualitative and quantitative data streams. From the qualitative approaches, we're particularly interested in photo voice, excited about photo voice. The intervention users actually, self-evaluating the intervention through their own eyes. As I mentioned, the routine monitoring and evaluation, day-to-day variable costs, and the use of the intervention, and so on and so on, all kind of disaggregated by gender, for example. And then going in and understanding what is happening in these markets. And we said also, we will also conduct a relatively small scale kind of consumption survey, particularly of nutrient-dense foods, within around 50 households within our study communities, understanding what they are consuming, how frequently, the sources of these foods as well. And is there potential then for the storage and drying to influence, or to match what is being consumed locally. Let me leave it there. I'm conscious of time, and we've thrown a lot of information at you. We've covered basically 3 years of our plans, varying degrees of detail. But just some discussion points from our side. We visited the field. We went to Kionja district. Would have been at the start of April, I believe, for our kind of most initial scoping visit. Let's go get our hands dirty. And just from initial conversations, we were able to, realize some kind of potential challenges that we're going to have to think very carefully about. Traditionally, any cold storage or any form of storage is set up that produce can be exported outside of, the district, or sometimes even the state. So often cold storage is sold as a way to, keep produce local and reduce post-harvest loss rates. But the current kind of orientation of these interventions is pushing produce out into high value streams. So we need to have a think about that. In rural areas of Odisha, markets they're of low density in space. You might go dozens of kilometers without meeting a market, and they often only happen once a week. So that in Bihar, for example, where the infusion study is, many markets happen every day or 3 times a week. So that frequency presents challenges. As I mentioned earlier, many of the retailers and farmers have coping strategies already. They will sell to schools. They will walk 5 kilometers to the nearest school and sell their unsold produce at the end of the day. They will need to be convinced, and part of that will be the co-design process, but be convinced that these interventions are worth using. The demand side as well, some of the qualitative work we're doing, cold stored vegetables is a novel food item, essentially in this region, and there hasn't been a lot of work on this. So we're also trying to understand people's perceptions, desires, around potentially cold stored fruits and vegetables. And of course, we've spoken about the methodological uncertainties around the feasibility scale of the project. How much can we say? Temptation is always to stretch slightly, but we also don't want to set ourselves up for failure. But I'll leave it there, team. Thank you. Sorry we took a good 35 minutes. And I will say thank you. Thank you, Ankita, as well. And hand over to Nola.
Thank you very much for that. We already have a couple of questions in the chat, and maybe I'll start with Praise's first question because it's a quick one, and it's a little bit more of a clarifying question. Sorry, now I need to find it again. I just lost it.
Around self-help SHGs.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Hey, sorry. Thank you for the question, Praise. Sorry, SHG in this context is self-help groups. So those are groups of often rural women in the Indian context who come together. Praise, did you want to come in? Sorry, you have your hand up.
No problem. Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you well, Praise.
Yeah, I was hoping to come in late.
Oh, we may have just lost you, Praise. Sorry. Did you want to come again? Oh, sorry,
Praise, we can't hear you. But if you want to type your question in the chat, we can read it out.
So just to say, SHG self-help groups, so collective organizations of rural women who often save maybe 5 rupees a week. That is then invested in agricultural production or marketing. So they are community organizations. Sorry for not making that clear.
What Praise had written in the chat was regarding the cold storage tech, where is it located? She's dropped off now, but.
For sure. I mean, currently the tech is, well, the tech on our project is currently located nowhere. We will be developing those. And there are two kind of key options, with a third as a reserve. Ideally, we would like to develop these interventions in the markets themselves, be available and usable to market retailers, to SHG, often SHG women who produce also then self-retail their produce. So there's a duality there. So ideally, it would be in the market. I think that would be ideal. If not, it would be somewhere along the supply chain on often these SHGs own a patch of land with good road access and so on. So where it can't be located is on a large farmer's piece of land. It can't be that, and we're going to have to really. And there's no, Pradhan, the NGO, they don't work with large farmers, so there's no risk of that necessarily initially, but there's always a chance of, this is what happens. So we need to be really careful about that. Ore, I see your question. Thank you. Has a risk register been developed for the project which considers the potential risk to setting this up? But yes and no. There was a brief one in the proposal, but we need to probably expand upon this. Yes, that is amongst friends. It is relative. There are some risks, right? I mean, developing infrastructure which comes with a cost, even if projects are paying for the intervention, at least the first one, before we try and couple with government subsidies, for example, that is always risky, and footfall and usage and demand and so on. So yes, perhaps we should put that on our to-do list. Yeah, I think. Yeah. What happens if there is disagreement on how to use this with the community users? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a part for the co-design process. And actually, I believe it will be the first time that group model building has been used in this context. But there is literature on dispute mediation and so on. The situation we're trying to avoid, right, is that we make the decision or Pradhan makes a decision. That is the kind of the worst case. But absolutely, it's something we're going to have to think about, and absolutely. Ashwarya, thank you. Local hierarchies and deeply rooted social dynamics or caste-related issues affect community participation. How does the project navigate traditional intersectionality and so on? Yeah, fantastic question. And Ankita, please, sorry, if I got up कुछ बोलना है तो please. I can start, and then if you have anything to add to this. Yeah, this is a fantastic question, Ashwarya. I think in terms of the co-design, in terms of who we're working with, if we go along the SHG and the agricultural produce cluster route, essentially these are farmer producer organizations set up by the government of Odisha. The government of Odisha are now trying to establish cold storage units by these APCs, close to these APCs. If we go along that route, the APCs are relatively homogenous socially, in terms of caste, in terms of the village, and so on. We'd then be looking to, okay, we'll take one relatively remote village, one relatively urban village, and so on. But that is definitely in the co-design elements. Intra-group hierarchies is something we will have to be careful about. And then if we introduce these interventions into a live market, where then you start to get the wider dynamics, that is something that we mentioned in the co-design element, kind of the safeguards, trying to develop these with the users. But yes, certainly something we'll have to think about. But thank you for the reminder. Ankita, did you want to anything there?
As a part of our methodology while we are conducting the FGD, something that we were thinking was to keep the groups separate. I mean, the caste composition and the large, not really the large farmers, but then if there are social barriers, then we have to be very careful while framing the questions, or if there's someone is uncomfortable with certain questions, and we'll
Mm.
form a different group. We'll get these understandings better as we do the formative phase.
Yeah, there'll be techniques we can use in the data collection before we then also get to co-design. But no, really important point, Ashwarya. Thank you. Alex, Will, Nola.
Yeah, if other people don't have further points, one really interesting observation is that you don't yet frame the project, and you might be interested in framing it in a with a couple of angles,
Please.
perspectives on it. The first is the relatively large amount of unused cold storage space that's been built out over recent years. So you go around and you see, cold storage stuff that was built and it's used just to store bags of fertilizer or whatever because it just doesn't work, right? So there's there's a history of misalignment, and you offer a path towards alignment, right?
Sure.
And just you don't mention that, right? That there's a history of failure in cold storage.
Sure.
A second really interesting angle and perspective that you haven't framed in terms of, but you might, like if this is attractive, is the distinction between cold chains and cold storage. So, so much of the existing refrigeration infrastructure in food around the world. And by the way, there's an amazing book called Frostbite about the history of refrigeration and how it deployed and is now used. They call it the cryosphere, the world of refrigerated spaces around the world. And all that focuses really on these cold chains where produce or milk and in the US, eggs, weirdly, which don't need to be, but are in the US refrigerated. This cryosphere focuses on cold chains that are where something is chilled at the farm and then remains cold throughout. And partly by analogy to cold chains in vaccines, people have this idea that, oh, there's a cold chain and cold chains are really important. And you talked a lot about the role of refrigeration in export crops where the cold chain is the key thing. But so much of this decentralized solar off-grid, potentially off-grid, small scale is about something other than a cold chain. And in our DAFMA project, we started calling this cold spots, where a cold spot offers the opportunity for just overnight storage at the market.
Yeah.
Just the 4 p.m. question. What do you do at 4 p.m., 3 p.m., right? Do you discount to sell or bring it home for chickens, or do you have a place where you can store it overnight and maybe sell in the morning? And the question of it, the difference in scale enables this difference in use, where a cold spot is just fundamentally different from a cold chain because it's about that one overnight storage or that one day potentially. There are other issues, other aspects of cold spot versus cold chain, but it's just a framing that might be interesting.
Thank you so much, Will. Yeah, absolutely. The cold spot, that's fantastic.
Because I really like the quality. The whole agenda of qualitative research around cost effectiveness, right? You can crunch the numbers on these things and see what is the rate of return on the investment. But ultimately, like, who gets to decide what's in the thing? It's just really fundamental. It's completely not obvious, right? And you're absolutely right to treat it very seriously and think about local control, group dynamics. All the agenda here is very interesting, but could be swamped just by cost effectiveness, right? It might be that this is just totally not, the rate of return is way too low to justify the capital expenditure. Like even in low, something like, just to close out, sorry to go on, but just to close out, like evaporative cooling, it's just really fundamental technology from the 1940s in tropical dry places. It only works in dry places. So it's not relevant to humid tropics, but it's been there, since the 40s, right? But costs have plunged, right, for the insulation, ultra lightweight insulation, and also, of course, solar panels themselves, but also the compressors and motors for evaporative cooling. Those are just much smaller and cheaper now than they were, ever before. And then for heat pumps, are more efficient. So you have a smaller, lower wattage heat pump combined with the cheaper insulation. So the cost is way cheaper now for smaller scale things, but it still may be just hopelessly cost ineffective. Because if you're not returning more than, 50, 60, 100% a year return, people just don't have the money for it. But it's a fascinating question whether stuff is profitable and yet there's a social dynamics problem that makes it just really hard to actually manage the thing. Yeah, it's great work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you all. Thank you. Any? Alex, you know that good question.
Sorry, we're technically at the hour, but I feel like if people have a couple extra minutes, then we can stay on.
Yeah, I did have one question for you, Greg and Ankita, if you're willing to share.
Please.
You opened by talking about the policy window in the state government of Odisha and their investment. I was just wondering if you could just speak more about that and the timeline and like the actual like things that they want to do. Because it was unclear to me, like obviously this is going to inform like implementation and rollout, but like what are the actual things that the state government wants to do? Are they contracting to companies to provide these? Are they going to buy them themselves, right? That just seems like super important to clarify. Um,
Thank you, Alex. Ankita, unless you want to take this, I'm happy to just cool. Great question, Alex. Thank you. So in late 2024, actually, when we were developing our concept note, the government of Odisha, so state level government, put out the funds come centrally, and they put out this circular that they're going to be putting around X million into the development of cold storage. And the government of Odisha have this infrastructure called agricultural production clusters, where in each district they utilize this self-help group network at the bottom, form agricultural production clusters. And it's around better connecting these APCs to cold storage units. And actually, I can share the document, but it's pretty broad. They don't necessarily specify particular tonnage or anything like that. Just this funding is available, and over the next, it would have been 2024, within the next kind of government cycle, this money will be spent to develop cold storages, kind of connecting APCs to these. Now, what they will do is they will, I'm imagining they'll kind of subcontract to a company. There'll be a call in the newspaper that says we're developing these cold storages in certain locations. So I imagine that money will be used to fund that form of construction. And actually, when we were in the office, the director of horticulture's office, he was saying we've already developed so many of these in West Odisha, but nobody is using them. And the director of agriculture said, it's because we built them and we didn't actually understand what people were going to. I was like, oh, he's actually making our case for us to the horticulture director. They have this money to spend. They're developing. They can then show on their budgets that they've developed X number of cold stores. I guess so far it's been a little bit kind of in the dark kind of construction. But sorry, Alex, I haven't answered your question properly, but I'm happy to share the document if you need it.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Irene, do you have a question? You have your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much. I have just joined because on my calendar this workshop was starting at 2 o'clock for me. Sorry that I
No worries.
misinserted it and I've lost quite a lot. I was just wondering if you could share your presentations, but
Yeah,
also maybe if I could follow up directly with you because
please.
I have like an initiative where we would like to start some solar powered
Mhm.
productive use initiatives, and I had really hoped to hear from your experiences.
No worries. I'm happy to share the slides. And where are you based, Irene?
I'm based in Switzerland, but I
Cool.
work on projects in Africa,
Great.
including Southern Africa.
Great. Absolutely. I'm happy to share my slides. There we go. The recording also will be shared.
Yeah, okay.
But more than happy to connect as well. I can just quickly drop my email address here in the
Yes,
chat.
that would be good.
Cool. I appreciate we're over time, but was there anything else anybody wanted to ask? Just before going back to Nola, just to say thank you. Thank you for watching and your questions and enthusiasm. Really, really appreciate it. And yeah, Nola would be keen to come back at some point. Not I don't know when, but we'll come back and give an update. And perhaps once we've done some of our formative work and started our co-design, we'd love to come back. Maybe other colleagues can present.
I think that would be really great. I think it would be fabulous to hear again how this has progressed and what findings you have, or preliminary findings, or if it's at a later
Yeah.
stage, what full-on findings you have. Thank you so much, both Ankita and Greg, for the presentation. And we'll be sure to follow along and see how it progresses. And thank you everyone else for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, team.
Ankita.
Thank you, Ankita.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.